On this Wednesday night, the Prime Minister goes public with a very private matter. Justin Trudeau and his wife Sophie are separating, how public life factored into their marriage. America's former vice president weighs in on Donald Trump.
The president was surrounded by a group of crackpot lawyers.
And what a co-conspirator allegedly suggested to stop anti-Trump protesters. Calling out the Russian president's lies.
I cannot be now quiet.
Ukraine's chief rabbi pushes back on Russian propaganda. And explosive warning, the massive volcanic eruption that could fuel global warming.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with personal news about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He and his wife, Sophie Grégoire Trudeau, have announced they're separating. They've been married for 18 years. She has been by his side throughout his political career, and they've raised 3 children together. They've attended countless public events together, including the King's coronation in London this spring. Grégoire Trudeau broke the news of the separation on Instagram today, saying, "Justin and I would like to share the fact that after many meaningful and difficult conversations, we have made the decision to separate. As always, we remain close family with deep love and respect for each other and for everything we have built and will continue to build." With me now is our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson. Mercedes, ending a marriage, especially when children are involved, is difficult for anyone. When you're in public office, it all happens in the spotlight. What is the Prime Minister's office saying about this?
Well, Donna, as you saw, the Prime Minister and Sophie Grégoire Trudeau decided to announce their separation in a more informal manner than the traditional press release of the past, posting in near simultaneous identical messages on Instagram. A formal statement followed from the Prime Minister's office that stated the two have signed, quote, a legal separation agreement and taken all necessary legal and ethical steps. Both the separation agreement and the carefully coordinated co-announcement are indicators that this was a carefully planned event. Going forward, the Prime Minister will continue to reside at Rideau Hall, as will the children. Sophie Grégoire Trudeau will live in an additional residence, but I am told that she will be present at Rideau Cottage quite regularly and that she will stay there when the Prime Minister is away as well. The whole family is going on vacation together in coming days, which tells you this is amicable, and the Prime Minister and Ms. Grégoire Trudeau have asked for privacy for their children. The focus, of course, is on protecting them. The Prime Minister has spoken in the past about how painful the separation was for him between his father and Margaret Trudeau, and he will likely be bearing that in mind now as he makes decisions. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the last Prime Minister to separate while in office.
Mercedes, Sophie Grégoire Trudeau has been by her husband's side since he got elected. They've endured a lot together. Will there be any political implications to this separation?
Well, as you said, Donna, this was really a political power couple, and Sophie Grégoire Trudeau's absence will certainly change how he campaigns. It could play politically, but Donna, the reality is also that many Canadians are separated or divorced and can relate. I'm told that the family will continue to appear together in public, so don't be surprised by seeing that, but Sophie will no longer carry out actual official duties. She has, of course, been a key part of Mr. Trudeau's political success, but we noticed a marked drop-off in her presence at Mr. Trudeau's appearances and her own visibility in recent months. The last time we saw them together was Canada Day. In terms of the opposition, I doubt that the leaders in those parties would go on the attack over something so personal, so this will likely be treated as a private event.
Okay, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks.
Anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. Sadly, the president was surrounded by a group of crackpot lawyers that kept telling him what his itching ears wanted to hear.
That is former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence talking about his former boss's attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The indictment filed yesterday details the ways Donald Trump pressured Pence to refuse to certify the results of that election. Trump is set to appear in court tomorrow on charges he conspired to cling to power. Jackson Proskow on what happens next.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
From the moment he refused to concede, Donald Trump allegedly began a sprawling campaign to overturn the will of voters, culminating in a violent attempt to block the transfer of power.
You have to see what happened at the Capitol as kind of the last, most desperate prong in a multi-part strategy.
That strategy is at the heart of the second federal indictment against the former president. 4 counts with one central claim, that Trump was fully aware he had lost the election, but kept up the seditious lie.
I don't think he's an island at all. I think he's the decision maker, but he was supported by a number of willing co-conspirators.
The indictment alleges one of those 6 co-conspirators even suggested turning the American military on citizens if protests erupted after Trump clung to power. They are likely to be charged separately to expedite Trump's trial.
My office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens.
It's been a long time coming, but in so many ways it just marks the beginning.
Police officer Daniel Hodges was brutally assaulted by Trump supporters on January 6, 2021. He sees criminal charges against Trump as necessary accountability.
What's your biggest worry about the future?
Well, that they'll learn from what they tried to do on January 6th and the months prior, and they'll do a better job of it in the future.
A serious concern, with Trump still a widely supported and viable contender in the 2024 presidential campaign.
What do you want people to remember?
That a democracy is only as strong as the people who participate in it.
The indictment suggests that former Vice President Mike Pence was no casual observer. His notes about Trump's desperate scheme form the basis for many of the charges. Donna, we should also note that the judge assigned to the case has a track record of harshly punishing other January 6th defendants.
All right, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. There was a slump on the stock market today after the ratings giant Fitch downgraded the U.S. government's AAA credit rating to AA+, citing financial and political instability. Wall Street's 3 biggest stock indices were all down at the close today. It was the Nasdaq's worst day since February, sliding more than 2%. Well, as Canadians deal with the skyrocketing cost of living, it's not easy to understand what is driving inflation. Profits at some corporations have soared, and so-called greedflation is often considered a cause of rising costs. But new research from the Bank of Canada is telling a different tale. Touria Izri explains.
Down, down, down with the bosses!
A wave of job action is sweeping across Canada, with Metro workers the latest to demand their wages match inflation. Or, as the NDP calls it, greedflation. The big grocery store chains have earned record profits over the past 3 years.
They're gouging Canadians. They're making more money than ever before, while Canadians can't afford to buy their groceries. So we're saying enough's enough.
But research by economists at the Bank of Canada is challenging that argument and landing in the middle of a thorny debate. A new report has found corporate profits are not driving up inflation.
It's not the first of its kind to look at the same question and to find the same result. Everybody seems to find that prices have more or less gone up in line with costs.
Economists at the central bank analyzed the financial statements of private companies. Writing in their report, our estimates suggest that markup growth accounted for less than 1/10 of inflation in 2021.
Underlying inflationary pressures are proving more stubborn.
The Bank of Canada declined our request for an interview and says the report does not represent its official view. But the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives insists it's hard to prove whether corporate profits are fueling inflation.
Who got those dollars at the end of the day? You know, was it workers through higher wages? It was, in fact, corporate profits that gained the largest chunk of inflation dollars that Canadians are paying.
Food is 9% more expensive this year than last. While inflation dipped below 3% for the first time in 2 years earlier this summer, high interest rates are hurting Canadians carrying debt and homeowners with variable mortgages. The Bank of Canada says it is monitoring what it calls corporate pricing behavior as it tries to control inflation and reach its target of 2%. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
In BC, there are fears about a dozen properties have been destroyed by wildfire in a popular recreational community northwest of Whistler. The Downton Lake fire was sparked by lightning on July 13th and flared up again late Monday. More than 200 properties around the lake got evacuation orders yesterday. The blaze is among more than 360 active wildfires across BC, 15 of them sparked in the last day. Our Neethu Garcha is inside the fire line with members of the BC Wildfire Service. She's getting an exclusive look at one of the biggest fires burning near a major urban centre. It is dangerous work. Tomorrow, Neethu looks at how BC crews are coping. 4 firefighters have died on the front lines in Canada this season. Nova Scotia RCMP believe a body they've recovered is that of a 14-year-old girl who went missing during extreme flooding last month.
No words can describe the sympathy that we feel for each of the families who've been so deeply affected by the floods. Although we wish the outcome was different, we're grateful that each person could return to their close families.
The body was discovered yesterday morning about 70 kilometers from where the girl disappeared. The province's medical examiner is working to identify the remains. A man and 2 children were also killed when 2 vehicles were swept away by rising floodwaters. 250 millimeters of rain fell in some areas during the storm late last month. In Ukraine, Russian drones have hit a port city on the border with Romania in a latest attempt to cut off Ukrainian grain exports. The Izmail port is on the Danube River. It became the main transport point for Ukrainian grain and oilseeds after the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal 2 weeks ago. Since pulling out of that agreement, Russia has hit 26 Ukrainian port facilities and destroyed about 180,000 tons of grain. Crystal Goomansingh explains the significance of this latest attack.
Ukraine's main inland port, seen here from the Romanian side of the Danube River, was attacked overnight, putting another hurdle between Ukraine's grain and its customers.
They want to show to the whole world and to ship owners that the ports of Ukraine, the ports of this region are dangerous.
Russia quit the UN Black Sea grain deal July 17th. It had created a humanitarian corridor that allowed roughly 33 million metric tons of grain and oilseeds to be moved out of Ukraine. Rob Hubert is a military strategist.
It's bleeding. Remember, one of the elements of the Russians is to bleed the enemy. You know, this is why the Russians traditionally haven't had that much of a concern when they're hitting civilian targets.
The Kremlin stated the attacks in the Danube targeted facilities housing foreign fighters, military hardware, and a naval shipyard. Russia has been accused in recent weeks of once again using food as a weapon of war. In his nightly message, the Ukrainian president said they are working to strengthen air defense systems. Units like this Gepard, based in the Kyiv region, have been the only line of defense against attacks on infrastructure sites. The Odessa region has been hit numerous times in recent weeks. Officials won't comment on how many air defense units are in the area, saying only more are needed.
All the ports are endangered. They could be attacked by the enemy in the future.
Danube River ports like the one in Izmail are a lifeline in moving Ukrainian food products to neighboring countries and then on to customers outside of Europe. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Torrential rain from a deadly typhoon coming up, the record-shattering rainfall that flooded Beijing. This is the heaviest rainfall in China's capital in 140 years, 744 millimeters in the last 4 days, and the impact is devastating. Streets turned into canals. At least 21 people are known to have died. 26 others are missing. There are fears some others may be trapped. Nearly 1 million people have been forced to flee their homes, and thousands of emergency crews have been dispatched to rescue those who are stranded. And in Japan, a typhoon slammed into the southwest island of Okinawa, toppling trees and flipping cars. There were wind gusts of nearly 200 kilometers an hour, and 250 millimeters of rain fell. At least one person was killed. Over 30 others have been hurt. Typhoon Kanun is now headed west, making its way towards China's southeast coast. A remarkable story has emerged from Brazil. 4 men from Nigeria survived 14 days at sea, perched precariously on the rudder of a cargo ship. In June, the men stowed away on the container ship just meters above the water, hoping to reach Europe They say they ran out of food and water on day 10 and somehow survived by drinking seawater. When they were rescued, they were shocked to learn they'd traveled 5,600 kilometers across the Atlantic to Brazil.
This is Brazil. That was the first thing they said. This is Brazil. I said, wow, this is Brazil. I made it to Brazil.
It was a terrible experience for me. Been a first time. I've never tried that before.
Those 2 men have applied for asylum in Brazil. The other 2 have returned to Nigeria at their own request. Still ahead, the Ukrainian rabbi pushing back against Vladimir Putin's propaganda. Since Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian president has falsely claimed he's liberating that country from Nazis. That rhetoric has proved particularly painful for Ukraine's Jewish community, whose ancestors endured the horrors of the Holocaust. Ukraine's chief rabbi is among the loudest voices pushing back against the Russian propaganda. Jeff Semple reports.
On the front lines of the war in Ukraine, you might not expect to find a rabbi.
Dear friends, now we go to save people that's waiting us.
Moshe Osman is Ukraine's chief rabbi. He's traversing the country, delivering aid and evacuating civilians, swapping his Jewish kippah and kittel for a helmet and flak jacket, and for good reason.
And the Russian here. Give me up!
On a recent trip to the flooded city of Kherson, a Russian shell landed nearby. Fortunately, no one was hurt.
The Russian army, they shelling to the civilian people for the evacuation missions.
Osman was born in Russia and moved to Kyiv 30 years ago with his Ukrainian wife. In 2015, he opened this refugee center for Ukrainians fleeing the fighting in the Donbass. When Russia invaded last year, his refugee center became a bomb shelter.
That's why I was very nervous, because I have many people, women, children. My children was there, and my grandchildren, small grandchildren.
When the bombs finally stopped hours later, Osman recorded this video for Facebook.
Бомбит Киев, мирное население, Киев, Харьков.
Speaking Russian and cradling a Torah scroll, he condemned the Russian people. The video was viewed nearly 1 million times, so the rabbi recorded another, and another.
Before the war, I was a very quiet guy. I cannot be now quiet.
His viral videos are recorded in Russian, Ukrainian, and English, calling for support from the West.
Thank you very much for everybody that's coming here.
Osman visited Canada this week after earlier trips to Israel, the UK, and the US, meeting with Ukrainian and Jewish community groups.
That it's very important to spread the word of truth and saying that Jews and Ukrainians are together.
This expert in Jewish-Ukrainian relations says some in the Jewish community remain divided over support for Ukraine.
The rabbi has very good influence people, and he can convince and explain.
For Ukrainian Jews, Putin's false claim about liberating the country from Nazis is particularly hard to stomach. What's your reaction to that?
Don't use it. What do you say? Ukrainian Nazis? We don't have Nazis in Ukraine. Please don't make speculation of the tragedy of Jewish people.
Now he says it's not the Nazis, but the Russians killing Jewish people. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Next, how a volcanic eruption in Tonga is contributing to historic heat. A blogger in Florida got quite the shock while filming a sewing tutorial.
And it gives you lines where you can put the trim.
A car went airborne. Jen Wesner was startled. Then she went to help. She says the driver missed a stop sign, crashed into a drainage ditch on her front lawn, and landed just a few meters from her house. The driver was not hurt. From Canada's historic wildfire season to sweltering heat waves in the U.S., Southern Europe, and North Africa, last month was the hottest July on Earth. Humans burning fossil fuels contributes to the warming planet, but there's evidence a massive volcanic eruption in Tonga last year is also playing a role in this summer's heat. Eric Sorensen explains.
It was only a matter of time for Hunga Tonga, and when the volcano blew, it blew big. An explosive plume that reached more than 50 kilometers above the Earth. Much of the eruption was beneath the ocean surface, sending more than 40 million tons of water vapor high into the atmosphere.
The seawater magma interaction shot everything up at very high velocity into the atmosphere and was one of the largest eruptions we've ever recorded with modern instrumentation.
It was the biggest volcanic eruption since Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines more than 30 years ago. But Pinatubo was very different, ejecting ash that scientists believed would have a cooling effect on the Earth.
Those droplets will then form a haze blocking out some of the sun's rays.
Indeed, when Pinatubo erupted in 1991, it spewed sulfur dioxide gas that spread over much of the planet. The particles deflected some of the sun's light and heat, cooling the Earth by 0.5 degrees over the next year. Now in 2022, Hunga Tonga mostly blasted water vapor high into the stratosphere. Like other greenhouse gases, it trapped some of the heat in our atmosphere, causing a slight warming, an estimated few hundredths of a degree.
Hunga Tonga may have increased the Earth's surface temperature this year only slightly, but however small, the lead researcher says every decimal point counts as the planet warms.
Those 2 or 3 hundredths of a degree that Tonga added temporarily do matter, and they do take us that fraction closer to 1.5 degrees, and that's important because of the importance of that temperature threshold.
Normally, ash from the biggest volcanoes provide temporary relief from the sun's intensity. But with Hunga Tonga last year, it was the opposite. Water vapor trapped more heat.
We need to monitor each of these volcanoes very closely because they're all different in slight ways that have big implications for the differences in their effects on our climate.
Volcanic eruptions are an unavoidable part of the natural world. And compared with the influence that humans have on climate, the impact of volcanoes is small and temporary. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the world's largest oil can in Rocanville, Saskatchewan. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.